Chilly here with Sirius Dallas Moon. This is Venus hour Jupiter day, and the ascendant is applying to conjoin Black Moon Lilith at 21 degrees Scorpio and midheaven 26 degrees Leo, ruled by the Sun. Sun conjoining Vendiametrix, and Vendiametrix is both a planet to do with corruption, but also with the correction of corruption. Here in the 12th house, this is a great time. Okay, Venus conjoining Ketu. This is a great time to talk about a topic that has been very relevant for what's going on in the world. And as an astrologer, as a relational astrologer, that before I began to do mundane astrology, um, I was basically looking at potential challenges in a sinistral composite. And as an astrologer that lives in Israel, a country that is known for profiling and is more aware of, let's just say, the is that working in praxis type of thing. And I made a video about that in Jupiter, in Rockefeller Astro Leaks. I was at the Israeli Ben Gurion airport when I did that episode. So here's the thing. There are people that begin to ponder, what about the astrology of supposedly personality disorders? And as with anything, people need to understand the phenomena. Okay, so this requires that level of understanding. And what people need to understand about personality disorders is that the structure of the training of people requires certain secret networking conditions that could equate to being on an Epstein list. And as a person that has been very acquainted with that system, both because of my thesis proposal, but before that, during the subprime crisis, the fact that I have been volunteering in um, very, very disorganized methods because I understood the lack of compatibility of the structure to people dealing with, let's say, mental crisis or ideation of suicide, and what are the actual solutions. So that's something that I know something about, let's put it that way. Now here is the confusing part before I'll begin. um, when I, in my personal life, ran into people that could be described as narcissists, there is a lot to that. It has to do with MK Ultra. It has to do with expandable children. It has to do with wealth consolidation that builds on putting people in perpetual trauma and keep them isolated from the ability to have a relationship. And if they are offenders, that's something that is even more difficult, because while hurt people, people do need to have their sense of safety in order to be with a partner. And in those circles, and I stopped at that in my previous video, um, those people learn how to develop Stockholm syndrome, as basically trauma bond, in other people as means to keep them both in connection but in control. And that has been permeating our politics, permeating elections, permeating the belief that there has to be a Stockholm syndrome between a candidate, a democratic candidate, and I don't mean Democratic Party, a candidate in a democratic system of elections and their voters. This also creates more proneness to polygamy over polyamory when there are emotions to people, both because with one person can find it difficult to contain their own emotions, and there are all these archetypes, but they're also afraid to allow a person that same type of freedom. And it's indeed very rare to have open relationships that are actually open, or monogamies that are actually not the hidden personality called that is polygamous Mormon in, you know, in some sort of a guise. That affects our politics, that affects our business, that affects the housing crisis, that affects relationships. And yeah, when I was dealing with that in academia, and I looked into a chart of a person, seeing the actual chart challenges was something that was, not humbling, because humbling is a part of a ritual that is meant to traffic people, okay, under the guise of humbling. But definitely it was having a perspective that, of course, only supported my setting boundaries. And yet, I want to emphasize on something very important. When there were attempts to clone people, have one cloned child going through ritual abuse and the other not. The child that was going through ritual abuse would develop all the sociopathy, psychopathy, or whatever they would program them to do, unless they would get smuggled out. And the child that would not be programmed and going through ritual abuse, they would not develop these traits. And that could be the same chart. Okay, if these are twins or these are cloned people, then they would have the same chart, sometimes with almost a similar ascendant. And in fact, my colleague Chris Brennan did the chart of Adolf Hitler juxtaposed to the chart of Charlie Chaplin. One person was allowed to do art, the other person was not allowed to do art. And we see the different expressions of charts that are practically very similar. So we can't ignore, every placement. Think about the sun right now is on Vendia metrics. That can produce a very corrupted leader that is a diplomat, or a judge, or even a woman leader who is a diplomat, or a woman psychiatrist who is, although it's Spica, Mercury Spica, they could be very eloquent, or there could be some sort of fairness around that. So Spica is kind of like skewing it more towards something is a little more fair. And at the same time, just the sun next to Vendia metrics could be a type of person who is exposed to corruption and plays a leading role in correcting corruption. So when it comes to trying to locate like narcissism in a chart, what we would locate, even if I think about, and you know what, let's open a chart that is less discussed, because everybody talks about Epstein. Let's bring up again the chart of Mark DeTroux, and I'm going to explain that according to that chart. So Mark DeTroux, and DeTroux natal chart. He was the Dutch Epstein. No, come on. DeTroux. He was the Dutch Epstein, and basically, only him was litigated and persecuted, although he couldn't physically rape all the girls that they found, bless you, in his dwelling. And here we see what immediately grabs the eye is Chiron Lilith in the 4th house, Saturn in the 2nd house. In Sag. He has his moon to my midheaven. So this is definitely a chart that just when I look at the Chiron Lilith, Lilith is about sexual sovereignty, Chiron is curation. This is definitely a chart of a person that could become Alandra. Alandra was groomed to be Epstein in the Montauk Gate project. And basically, he was both raped to be a breeder, and he was groomed to rape, to traffic, to play with timelines of people, and even work with aliens. So that is a person that somehow managed to partner up with aliens to play pretend as if he's bringing what he's asked to bring, and then somehow get away from the ritual abuse. Now, Epstein or Detroux didn't manage to do that. Um, and indeed, we see the conjoining of Rahu Saturn that gives us um, that person getting caught towards his 40 or becoming more imprisoned towards his 40s, um, some sort of a karmic repercussion. However, this chart could absolutely be a person who is becoming satanic ritual abuse and having teachings um, of how to prevent the curses, the medical curses, how to prevent the sieging of cities, because Jupiter 24 degrees Virgo is very close to Al Qaeda. So this would be absolutely a person that if there would be the right conditions for him, he could absolutely become like Alandra that speaks about how to curate from a situation when one was born into an upbringing, and particularly a real estate where the notion of freedom, Saturn in Sagittarius, or the structure was supposed to liberate, but it was an enslavement notion intermeshed with liberation, where one had to be adaptable, Jupiter Mercury, and blend in. That is very literally Masonic. That is very literally these boys that are raped, that are supposedly initiated into an enslaving structure, and they are being told that they are free because they can get away, Jupiter Mercury, okay, with basically perpetuating crime that has to do with sexual energy, sexual boundary violation, and the science of that regarding real estate, and then become an owner of an estate. So here we see two possibilities. One, Lilith Chiron, a person who is curing the real estate from basically being Detroux mentions or Epstein mentions. And another possibility, which unfortunately is what mostly happened with Detroux. And again, we don't have, a lot of people get arrested or get exposed because they start to glitch. And this is also something to keep in mind. Um, and so that basically got into a situation where, having gone through the perpetual abuse, we can definitely see that in the chart, but it's not the only way or the only venue where that could have gone. And it takes more than just the person warping. It takes more than just the person, um, because those kind of really unreasonable circumstances are beyond the psyche's ability to comprehend, so much so that there are absolutely glitches. When there are glitches in the matrix, and if you listen to Alondra, the amount of energy put in torturing these people to be who they are is so immense, that on the one hand it retrieves the faith in humanity, and on the other hand it's like, well, somebody tortures them. So, and that's a part of wealth consolidation to do with real estate, the stocks and bonds Saturn around real estates, free trade. Yes, Mercury, Scorpio conjoining the Sun, 11-degree ascendant, Mars in Pisces, 17 degrees. Um, Uranus, 6 degrees Leo, Pluto, 0 degree Virgo, okay, conjoining Regulus, and Venus, 6 degrees conjoining Zendaya in the 12th house. And indeed, there were girls that were compromised and they had to people please in basically a secret dwelling. But that also pertains to the way that Detroux himself would be treated. We talk about feminization rituals and having to people please, the diplomacy, the jurisdiction, or even the mental health hospitals. and in there would be girls or there would be women, um, and this is yes, could be on the border of day chart, night chart, so it's difficult to tell how that worked. Moon that rules housing on the galactic center tells us of a person that could pivot in benefit of humanity and could pivot against humanity, um, with that moon ruling over Cancer, which is in the ninth house. So there would be an international element to the housing, and there was something to do with having to adapt one's notions, one's values around freedom to basically the goals and dreams, and being known for that, because you see that um, basically this Jupiter is ruling over the second house and is ruling over the fifth house, and that rules over the first house and is ruled by Mercury, which correlates the 11th house, which is a public house, into the first house, and the 10th house correlates to the first house, which is they're gonna know type of thing, and so it was probably that was very likely his reputation in his circles. He was a leading figure in that. And by the way, an electrician. So you think about Uranus Sol in the 10th house, and Uranus electricity, Sun energy, and then Sun in Scorpio in the first house, and that unfortunately had a little bit of a darker facet with what he actually did, which was, Epsteining. Um, so we can also see how visible that chart is, and that is by design. That was a chart that was meant to leak. That was a chart that was meant to be exposed. That with Neptune in the first house, come the Neptune sextile, come the Neptune square, and the Neptune square would have been from the fourth house, which would leak literally his house. Okay, that would be around the 40s, and it would leak literally his housing and what went on there. And that's about the time that the Detroux case, it was the 1996, that was the White March, was exposed. Again, something very international about the housing, galactic center. Yes, so very, very powerful. So it's not like we can't see what happened in the chart, but it's not like I would be able to see this chart, and I think I did Dr. Mengele's chart as well. It's not like I would be able to look at this chart and immediately see that person is going to be a Detroux, because he could have been a Landra at the same time. Even when it comes to the risk factors, which is like Sun with Ketu, Moon with Ketu, we don't have any of those. The Moon has nice aspects to Pluto and to Neptune. So the Moon is actually not terribly aspected at all. And the Sun is trining Mars, which is also not a terrible aspect at all. But squaring Uranus, separating from a square to Uranus. So that's a little bit of a challenging, rebellious aspect, but that person could have rebelled the regime or made transformations in, bringing into crisis of leadership, which he did. But you see, it's not like Moon Ketu, Sun Ketu, Moon Rahu, Sun Rahu, where a person would deal with psychological challenges throughout their entire life and so on and so forth. No, it's not like that. There is Saturn Rahu, which in his case led to him being exposed and imprisoned. And Chiron Lilith in our day and age is about recovery from domestic sexual boundary violation based abuse. And unfortunately, that part for Detru didn't happen. Um, and this is where we can see that there was, but at the same time, this could absolutely be, the chart of Britney Spears. I remember when I did chart of Britney Spears, and I knew nothing of what I know today, and I just said, this looks like this lady was held hostage, and she wasn't even sick. I'm listening to her voice, and she wasn't even like she was being held hostage against her wish and has something to do with trafficking. And I know nothing about what I know today, but that is something like what I see here with Detroux's chart. So we can see how that in our day and age, in another day and age, that could simply be how the sexual energy is embodied, and how having a tantric orgasm could have eurekas about masonry and how to change the house to feng shui, to fit the energies for birthing or growing the family. Like this is actually something that an embodied energy could do with that aspect. Detru never got the chance to, and what he was perpetuating is beyond frightening. Um, I'm not going to go into the delineation of the what and so on and so forth, um, but this is a good example when people try to see what is the astrological chart of, let's say, a narcissist or a borderline. Um, well, the people that came up with this diagnosis, it was when it came to, I remember when it was the uptake of recognizing gaslighting, recognizing trauma bonds, recognizing cult-like thinking and cult-like relations. And the one of the most challenging things, the information came from outside the therapy world and outside the psychiatric world. And it was very difficult because a lot of the people inside that world were narcissists and borderline. And that meant and then came the healing the narcissist paradigm, but none of that without addressing the wealth consolidation and the external factors. We can't really provide housing first, independent of ability to work, believing the person and retrieving their own faith in their own value and the places where they can trust themselves so that they can expand on regaining self-trust. Um, and to understand that the culture these people grew up on is that being anywhere near vulnerable is being a loser, and vulnerability could only take place if it's a part of a scammy type of lover boy or or toxic relational patterns that leaves everybody wounded, no matter how many states that there are, because they would have to be involved in extortion cult to have housing. So yes, I know that it's probably trendy to think about, oh, what would be the astrological traits of a narcissist and so on. And when it comes to relations, of course, having outer planets to inner planets challenging aspects is a big deal, and we're always going to have them. There's always going to be something. And And the way to work out through that is to do the outer planet work, which is tending to that in society. Whether it's Pluto, it's in this economy, Neptune, secret societies, Aries, the cloning project, and the torture of the clones. Okay, Aries is not just LGBTQ rights. Oh, Palestine, free Palestine. Palestine is not free with the watermelon uptick Muslim Brotherhood of Satan. That's just it's the same cult under a different name to Baphomet. That's that's just okay. And definitely Palestine needs to be free, but so just like Israel is not free with the Trumpstein real estate project in Gaza and the drawing of the oil and the gas that, by the way, nobody wants to trade. And here is another topic. Netherlands. Netherlands has been on the news, being exposed like it's the biggest evil of all times and so on. And here's the thing. Yes, the ICJs in Netherlands, in The Hague, where would we sue Netherlands for, let's say, war crimes? That's an issue we're going to have with any country the ICJ is going to be at, the International Court of Justice. Um, at the same time, so at the same time, um, when it comes to what's behind that, one of the things that Netherlands did is, and also Germany, by the way, is energy sovereignty. Okay, separating, being in the process to separate from the Catholic, the Catholic Bolshevik marriage to Russia's oil and gas, and that is something that would put Netherlands on the map for things. It basically sets Netherlands for dealing with the Code Orange, which is the fear of being invaded, and and there were a lot of problems with that. I think that even some of the scandals that the previous prime ministers, now head of NATO, was accused of had to do with going towards that energy sovereignty. Now you could think about it as the WEF being the clock, the broken clock that is still correct twice a day, but um, but that's not the only country that is WEFing. You know, Herzog, I'm sorry, Herzog is also Israel president WEFing, and a lot of the people are WEFing. You know, a lot of those milieu are WEFing. It was a way to reach power position through unelected positions, and then they became, in parts of democratic regimes. Um, but that is, one part of the equation. The other part is that Netherlands has moved into energy sovereignty, and that's something that happened to Morocco in around 2014 as well. And again, without sexual sovereignty in spirit and in matter, it's very difficult to sustain any type of sovereignty, including the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolshevik Revolution was just setting things up for the First World War and so on and so forth. And anything that funds itself off of these things, is is basically setting itself up to be extorted, which eventually is what happens. Um, but what we need to learn about that is how, I talked about the Gaddafi case, how Netherlands did do a lot of the steps that was supposed to lead up to an even, I don't know if a successful exit, but definitely energy sovereignty is one of the main things and what include that assist protecting the airspace. Okay, when you have ecosystemic drones, um, then you know, I guess people need to look at the models of Albania, but Albania is also part of NATO. Um, it is a challenge, okay? So it's like one has to get along with other countries and then maintain the sovereignty as well. But we're definitely moving from the oil infrastructures. One way or another, China is building windmills in the mountains, and it has quite some mountains. Netherlands is going off the gas and the oil of Russia, making it susceptible to a code orange. Um, and one would say that those investments, that the savings went on NATO. Well, I don't know, but it is definitely important to understand that the world is moving away from the oil trade, one way or another. And as challenging as it may be, as many scandals that people are going to put everybody in, that prompts the list of exposure, that prompts the you know that prompts the onset of extortion calls activated. um, and we also have to understand that to change wealth consolidation comes with sexual sovereignty in spirit and in matter. And it comes with energies that are derived from the air and derived from the sun, more so than the oils and the gas that we used to rely on. And this is an imminent truth. It's not something, people can delay that up to a point, but eventually they're going to have to deal with that. And there's a lot of depopulation going on, and also the attempts to have, Stockholm syndrome, polygamy, Mormon cults controlling, okay, controlling the economy or worldwide, particularly the worldwide surveillance. Bless you. If my mom sneezes, it's true. Um, that's not going to. That's not going to yield. Let's just put it that way. It's not going to yield. Um, but for that to happen, people have to understand that sexual sovereignty is not just for women. It's not just a shit that feminists say. It's not just it's kind of like, and the more smug people are around those things, the bigger the downfall. Because when it comes to communist regimes, to and surveillance regimes are communist regimes. We see the United States. We see what's happening in the United States. Surveillance state is not a liberal state. It's a commie state. A country that bases itself off of human trafficking is not a capitalist state. It's a human trade state. Maybe it's a feudalist. Maybe even the feudalism. It needed slaves, so it needed people to be able to work, and um, and at the same time, those supposed commie states are doing mineral exchange, which is going to either appease Sedna or fall into world hunger. And what is appeasing Sedna? Why do the Inuit worship Sedna as a true love goddess? Because she stood up and she did not go for the men that were trafficking, and eventually, when she was not accommodated, there was no food for the entire society, and they had to send a shaman underwater to comb her hair with a particular touch that would be loving and honoring and respectful and coming to provide rather than to traffic or to take or to see Sedna as something that serves his own erotic fantasies without considering um, what would be the symbol for another goddess, and this is either Sophia or, as people know her, as Mary Magdalene. And here is the point: if people think that Jesus' wife was a hoe or a repentant prostitute, they're setting themselves up for never be able to having real estate of their own. Most families are homeless. They think they own a property. They think they own housing. They think they go to church and they pray to God and they put God first. But what is the symbol for Mary Magdalene? I have been talking about that symbol before I knew it was the symbol for Mary Magdalene. So there is this flower which symbolizes the genitals, particularly what people call the yoni or the vagina, and or the female genitals. And there are two circles. And those two circles have a point where they overlap. That overlap is the yoni shape, and there's almost like a star, which is both the clitoris and the female orgasm, which is the union of the sexual fantasies of the vagina partner and the sexual fantasies of the other partner, vagina or penis, in overlap, where both of them are in willing consent, in tantric embodiment, and that's actually the orgasm. That's actually the female orgasm. It's a tantric union orgasm. It's not about programming. It's not about violating the sexual sovereignty. Those get the vagina yeasty. It's not about doing the things that would appease and then treason, because that would get, that would get the treason cult to be exposed and annihilated and persecuted and cry out, oh, they're persecuting the Masons. No, they're not. They're doing to the Masons what they did to the feminine. That's all. And this is also the way to antidote that. Um, so, again, bringing it all together, we can't just, do astrology without the context of the spirit of the time. And we can't just do astrology without, if we talk about like psychiatric stuff or personality stuff, it's not enough to have a degree in psychiatry. It's also understanding of the underlying work. And think about Neptune as ruling psychiatry, moving from Pisces, where we learn how to holistically heal a patient and look at psychiatric disorders more holistically, into Aries, where we will find the holistic meaning of sovereignty and the holistic meaning of Aries, which is identity, sexual sovereignty in spirit and in matter, and real estate, business, banking, iron, the blood, weapon, laser focused, oak homosexuality, okay, everything penis, everything phallic, so to speak, and yes, and justice and war, the art of war. Now, Neptune rules sacrifice, and there's going to be an ideation of sacrifice and devaluation of sacrifice, but also miraculous healing, where, how should I say that? With Neptune, the miraculous healing is about understanding that something was never a sacrifice. Okay? So think about the stealth assets or the liquid assets. There's just something about the Neptune dream state, manifestation, void reality, and we're going to have a new way of understanding Neptune, new ways of, because Neptune is in the sign of doing, and we're going to learn a more relaxed action, but also being actively in the void. And that is going to change the way people think or conceive psychiatry. For example, we think about Neptune, Aries, and colonialism. One of my essays was about the British Empire using the myth Neptune of psychiatry Neptune in India, okay, faraway land Neptune, as means to get the people in Britain grieving the lack of, longing for Neptune, the psychiatry that is the myth of psychiatry that there is in the Indian Empire, in the Indian colonies, for that to be in Britain, and basing off the British, the rejuvenated British class and the rejuvenated British identity based off of the myth of psychiatry. I ran into that towards the end of my first degree, where my philosophy of science paradigms were, I was educated around, Kuhn, which talked about the scientific data accumulating until we have to shift the paradigm when it comes to scientific revolution. And then I was like, well, what happened with psychiatry is like completely different. There was a myth of science before people began to demand mental health, and before it actually began to incarnate. And funnily enough, the curation for schizophrenia, schizoaffective, and all the real harsh stuff around psychiatry have to do with having housing first, so the person independently have ability to work for unlimited time, because this is a place of grounding unconditional love for a person, and unconditional love is also Neptune, by the way, and believe in the patient. Neptune also rules intelligence, so that would be a strategic advantage that Finland takes advantage of in the face of Russia. Although open dialogue was invented in Netherlands and housing first was invented in the United States, but they just gave a 9-month, as if it's labor, 9 months and that's it. And Section 8 became a flop, became a fertile ground for the house flippers and the Detrouxs and the Epsteins. Okay, that's what happens when a Section 8 falls. It becomes a Detroux, Epstein, Trumpstein land. And this is also the by design of why it falls, and the by design of why the Detrouxs did not get to be a Landras. Okay, very likely when I was a child in Israel, there was an attempt to kidnap me, very likely to the Detrouxs. Okay, so I understand. Okay, so this is the scope from which I'm saying that. And Mark Detroux himself has a midheaven, has a moon conjoining a mine midheaven. Which means that I myself did not get to be a Detroux because I was born but outside, and I was saved as a child from being kidnapped into those mansions. This is the meaning of housing first and believing the patient. And believing the patient gives one an intelligence advantage, because those were extortion cults. Look, it is 22. 22 Pisces. Trining Jupiter 22. Now people ask, what were the Detrouxs and the Epsteins all associated? I'm like, probably at like, you know, um, the rituals are the same rituals. It's about wealth consolidation, and this is the point of interference. Because when it's Holocaust o'clock, the people at the death camps, there's a reason they say that the good ones didn't make it. And this is why, this is a part of why I'm making this episode, because we can, do an intellectual masturbating on the astrology of psychiatric disorders, but without understanding that to have a degree in psychiatry, one has to have their face in front of the camera raping a child, whether they are aware of it or dissociated or went through torture after that or not. That, of course, affects the mental health care available for the common people as well. But it also affects the ability of an Epstein or a Detroux or a Diddler to become a Landra, because, as Dr. Alison Miller puts it very well, when she began to tend to these cases, she became a targeted individual. She did not even know what those people have, and there was no, she was not equipped. Now, people ask me, is she on camera with it? I don't know, okay? I don't know. But definitely she was interested in providing cure for the people that went through ritual abuse. And that would entail the people that went through MK Ultra and the people that went to MK Often, which is the psychic sister of MK Ultra. And that would be a big deal. Psychiatric disorders and personality disorders are considered this thing that one just has to live with, or post-trauma one just has to live with. Well, actually curating from that is taking action to change what created the trauma. And this is where solventiometrics here is important, because just to dismissing something as, oh, well, that's just a psychopath-born person, just this, just that. No, that's actually not the answer, not scientifically, not structurally. And we cannot read astrology that way without actually being complicit with crimes against humanity. Now, you can imagine that they want to regulate the astrology so that people will have to have a certification, which basically means them becoming informants, at the very least. And to become informants, they would need to be extorted in some fashion. So, whether it's something weird that they did, or something that they did in fraternities, or something in the family, or something they had to be complacent with. You think about the first things that were exposed about Epstein, that was that the pictures of Epstein with somebody. Think about how many people have their picture with Puff Daddy. He was a part of the music. Like when Lil Kim wanted to escape violence, not when Lil Kim, when Mariah Carey wanted to escape violence, one of the people she met with, I think, was Puff Daddy. And she was asked about Puff Daddy. She said he is the future. So just think about the fact that how easy it would have gotten to get a picture with Puff Daddy, not knowing about anything. And if you include the drugs and if you include the dissociations into the mix, so just think about what Lil Kim has been through, because she was surrounded by both being considered a third party in Biggie's marriage, while being harmed by Biggie, and the people she would have to go to would be like R. Kelly and and Puff Daddy. That's um, and so um, yeah, and all the women around would have been women that has gone through torture and programming to betray as well, um, which would provide for a lot of drama and a lot of scandals. And even when it comes to the people that have Saturn matured, okay, kind of like the Saturn return generation, um, they were not exempt from those death cults. Okay, maybe they were a glitch in the matrix, um, but there's also ideation, I believe, happening around that. Um, Sometimes it means that somebody protected themselves from a destiny swap and somebody died. Okay, so that is true, and that is true, and also take into account that people like how do you say that? People look into, let's say, the esotericism of Egypt. So they see the Eye of Horus. They don't necessarily connect that to the way the Epstein works with the Eye of Horus as a branding of, women. The squinting, and I have to tell you, when I try to get a profile picture of myself that's actually looking great, sometimes I would try, to cover one eye, to have, have the squinting, or have a facial expression that is kind of like cheeky and so on. And there you have it. Now you're basically participating in an Illuminati symbolism that you never picked to begin with. Most of the people that you're going to see doing the weird finger gestures, um, either are tortured to do so or psychically attacked. Um, and then when it comes to the people that are celebrities, there are all types of hijacking, and there is no valid NDA in that industry. Even when I was singing yesterday, there was an attempt to make me say the NDA was valid, and then I changed it to and then it was invalid. Because no, there is no valid NDA there. There is no valid NDA there.